Hey, I'm Tracie Goodman, and I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resource and 4-H agent with McCreary County Extension. And to finish up the gardening basic series that I started earlier this year, I'm going to take you through a garden cleanup. So at the end, I'm going to show you a clip of me cleaning out my own garden and some of the things that I do and that I'm planning to do to prepare for next season. And I'll start you off with a few things that I've added as kind of a to-do list, the most important things that you need to do this season to get ready for next season. So this is my, I guess, most important to-do list, or some of the things that you should consider at the end of the season. Number one is cleanup. So you want to get all of your crop residues and your spent plants out of your garden. Pests like to overwinter in the soil. So if you have a really bad pest issue, like I have had this year, you definitely want to get rid of those spent materials and not give them a reason to stick around for next year. And then another important thing that you can do to prepare for next season is to get a soil test. So I've done several programs on soil testing, and I will link those in the video description. Soil testing is a free service that we offer to McCreary County residents. So if you collect your sample, bring it to us, then we will do the rest. And your soil test is going to tell you exactly what you need to do to amend your soil for the next growing season. So this gives you a little bit of a jump start in the next season, so there's not so much for you to do in the springtime. Number 3 is to plant a cover crop, which this is optional, but cover crops really help with a lot of things, which we will talk about a little bit later. And you want to probably think about adding organic matter back to your soil to just improve the texture and the nutrient holding capacity, drainage, all of those things of your soil. And then definitely one of the most important things that you can do is to start making a plan for next year. So take a walk through your garden, make a note of what worked, what didn't, and plan out what you're going to do so you can be ahead. So this picture is from my garden, and the picture on the last slide was as well. As you can see, there's a lot that I need to get done, and I did get some of that done, which I did record and put at the end of this video. But I have lots of weeds that kind of took over. I let everything kind of finish out. The only thing that I really still have producing in my garden are peppers at the moment. You definitely want to get rid of your spent plant materials and your weeds so that your pests don't overwinter. You also don't want to keep weed seeds around for next season as well. And your best bet, if they are really heavily laden with seeds, especially weeds and diseases, if you've had pest issues, your best bet is to destroy those and not try to compost them. Now, one of the things that I see conflicted a lot on the internet is whether you should clean up your garden or not, because beneficial insects also make a home there. And this is something that you're going to have to decide on your own. So in my case, because I have had such a pest issue this year, I am getting rid of all of my plant materials that I had issues with, because I don't want to take a chance on them coming back next year. I don't want to have an even bigger problem to deal with. So I'm just going to get rid of all that stuff in my garden. Now, the things that I didn't have so much of an issue with, like I will probably leave my corn stalks up a little bit. I'll probably leave my sunflowers standing for a little bit just to allow birds to get those seeds out, that type of thing. But this is definitely something that you decide on your own, because beneficial insects, they do make a home in some of these plant materials as well. And as you're cleaning, you can definitely do this with a tiller, but I personally like to just hand pull my plants out of the ground just to make sure I get the root ball and everything out. Tomato plants come up really easily. Most things that are planted in your garden are going to pull up pretty easily, but if you have trouble, you can cut them off at the soil line as well. And then afterward, you can disc all of that under so that it kind of turns the soil over and kind of cleans up all of your weeds as well, so that you don't have to hand pull those, because that's, as you can see in my picture, I mean, that would take me forever if I hand pulled all of this stuff. So I am going to utilize a tractor to finish the cleanup once I pull my plants up. Now, these are just a few little additional notes to clean up and some of the things that you need to take into consideration. So if you have perennials planted in your gardens, so some examples of perennial garden plants are asparagus, rhubarb, those type of things that we have in Kentucky. You're going to want to research the care that is needed for those plants and what exactly you need to do to overwinter them. So if you need to prune them back, if you need to mulch over top of them, you're going to want to know those things so that you can ensure that those plants come back healthy next year. If you have some fall crops remaining in the garden, so say things like potatoes that can stay in the ground a little bit longer, go ahead and finish harvesting those, which that is something that I did before I cleaned anything up. You can still leave things in your garden that are producing and clean up around them, and that will be fine. This is also a good time to save some seeds. So if you plant things like beans, peas, if you want to save like some flower seeds that are growing in your garden, this is a good time to do it because most of the time those things have already dried up. So this time of year, your beans are drying up on the vine. It's a good time to just go ahead and grab those pods and harvest them so you can kill two birds with one stone there. But you want to be cautious, especially about harvesting seeds from diseased plants. You want those plants to be healthy plants that you get your seeds from because you don't want to pass on those diseases to future plants that come from those seeds. So just be careful about which plants that you harvest seeds from. Now, as I've said multiple times in multiple programs, get a soil test. Soil testing is a really important resource that we offer. It's going to tell you exactly what nutrients that you need to add back to your soil because vegetables, things that you grow, pull nutrients from the soil. So you want to try to add those back in some way. Now, fall is definitely the best time to get a soil test done, not only because of timing, it allows you ample time to try and amend your soil prior to spring. Making a plan for what type of fertilizer that you need, what type of soil amendments that you need to get done is definitely going to give you a huge jump start on the next growing season because gardeners have a lot to do in the spring. So the more you can do to get ready before that big planting season hits, you're going to be glad that you did it. And I will leave the programs that I have done on this listed in the description box of the video. Now, cover crops, they are optional, but if you want to do a cover crop in your garden, I think that's a really great thing to do because they offer a lot of benefits. One of the major ones is that they offer weed suppression. If you have a cover crop growing, your weeds are going to be less likely to try and compete with that cover crop. It also helps with erosion, so soil being carried away by wind or water. It adds organic matter. As your cover crops die off, they decompose, which adds organic matter back to your soil. And there are also some cover crops that you can plant that are nitrogen fixing. So they may capture or recycle nutrients in that way. Mulching is another contribution that they add. And your cover crops that you choose can have multiple uses. So say you have livestock, you can use a forage type cover crop and then cut that off and feed it to your livestock. You can use it for grains. Wildlife viewing, if that is something that you really want, you can plant a cover crop that attracts wildlife. So there are many uses for cover crops that you can plant in your garden. And the chart on the screen shows some of the examples of cover crops for Kentucky and their characteristics, so you can choose which ones will grow well in your soil in your garden. And I will have the publication that this is in linked at the end of the video. Now, adding organic matter is an important addition to your soil. It does improve the texture of your soil. It improves drainage. It improves the nutrient holding capacity of your soil. There's a lot of things that this does. So my personal plan, because I have so many leaves, is to just till and work in that leaf litter into my soil and allow it to decompose and add organic matter back to my soil. Now you can also use compost, you can use plant materials, that type of thing. And the rule of thumb typically is that you want to add about 1 to 2 inches of organic matter to the top of your soil. This is also a good time of year to stockpile your compost. So if you have a compost bin or pile at your house, keep adding to that over this season so that you'll have a good stock to pull from in the next season. And manure is another organic material that you can add to your garden. You can apply fresh manure in the fall because it does have plenty of time to break down before you plant things in the spring. If you are going to apply it in the spring, though, you're going to want to make sure that you use older composted manure in the springtime. And lastly, this is really important and something that is really going to help you out a lot. So it seems kind of absurd to go ahead and make a plan for next season because spring seems like it's really far away when fall hits. But it really, really helps you to get ahead. So kind of take a walk through your garden, note where you had things planted this year, and try to plan to maybe rotate your crops a little bit next year. So one of the mistakes that I made this year is kind of accidentally planting my nightshades a little bit too close together. So I had my potatoes kind of on one side of my garden, and then kind of close to it, I had peppers, and then I had tomatoes. So they were all in the same area, and I had a really big infestation of flea beetles, which are attracted to all three of those vegetables. So that is something that I plan to do next year is rotate those things around and try to get them a little bit further apart for next year. So this is definitely a good time to plan where you're going to put what. Also a good time to make additions to your garden if you plan on expanding it or adding anything. So preparing new beds if you're wanting to do fencing, if you're wanting to build some type of structures, if you're expanding your space, all of those things you can get done in the fall, and that's going to put you ahead for next season. Because another mistake that I made, which wasn't necessarily a mistake, I just really didn't have a choice. Our garden had to be moved this year, so I had to basically build a new garden from scratch this year. And that included putting up fencing because the spot where we put our garden had a horse in the pasture, and I did not want her getting into the garden and eating all my stuff or trampling it, pooping on stuff, whatever. I just didn't want her in there. So I had to put up a fence. We had to put a rain barrel up there because we didn't have a water supply at that spot particularly. So there was a lot of things that I had to do. I had to construct my raised beds, and it was a lot of work, especially on top of planting an entire garden and getting your soil ready for that garden. So definitely the more you can do in the fall, the better. And also it's better weather this time of year instead of trying to do it in 80, 90-degree weather like I did. And also, if you wanted to maybe incorporate an irrigation system, good time to do it is to do it before you plant anything because maneuvering around those plants, especially if you have to go underground for it, will be really hard. So maybe doing that, maybe installing landscape fabric, all of those things that you need to do in preparation for planting, a lot of them you can get done in the fall. And like I said, I mean, just take a walk through, make a note of what worked and what didn't, because you're more likely going to remember that at the end of your growing season than you will in the springtime when you're trying to think back to last year's garden and think, well, what did I like that I planted? What didn't work out? What did I struggle with? So definitely keep a log of those things, and it's really going to help you out for next season. And these are the references that I used for this presentation and also references that I personally use myself. They're really valuable. They have lots of great information in them. And I will put the links to all of these in the video description. And now I'm going to move on to a video of me cleaning out part of my own garden and putting some of these things that I have talked about to practice. horse is helping me clean up today. Thanks, girl. So if I wanted to save seeds, this would be a good time to do it, especially for these beans, because they are drying out fairly good. Honestly, I could leave these on here longer if I wanted them to completely dry out. I don't necessarily want to grow this type of beans again next year, just because they had strings, and I don't love a bean that has strings. I hate breaking and stringing beans. I just hate it. So I am going to be looking for a stringless variety for next year. Okay, so my goal in doing what I did today, which obviously you can tell my garden still is overrun with weeds. That's okay. I will take care of that. But my goal today was just to tear out all of these spent tomato plants, because I had a really big issue with pests on my tomato plants this year. So I definitely wanted to get rid of those. Flea beetles overwinter in the ground, and I had tons of those on my tomatoes, and actually my peppers as well. So that is why I just went ahead and ripped those out. My peppers are still producing, so I'm gonna leave those until they're finished, and then I will rip those out as well, because I also had pest issues with my peppers. Not as bad as my tomatoes, but still, I don't want those pests to have a reason to stick around, you know. And then I also, which I did harvest potatoes, that's been a while ago, and I took out some cabbages, took out some worm-eaten cabbages, because I did have pest issues with cabbages as well. I took a lot of the beans out because I had issues with the Mexican bean beetles, and obviously that back part is still a complete mess, but I am gonna leave my corn and my sunflowers just standing for a little bit, because I didn't really have pest issues at this end of the garden. I had weed issues, so yeah, I do need to get rid of the weeds at some point, but I'm not as worried about those right now. And I did get all of my potatoes out of here today, which I had a disappointing potato harvest this year, but I was pleasantly surprised by this bed. I actually got more out of this bed than I was expecting, because these plants were hit super hard by flea beetles. So that was a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting anything, so what little I got, I'm happy with. And that is pretty much all I'm gonna do for today. I do plan on taking the tractor through all of this, just to turn the soil over to get rid of, you know, pests, weed seeds, that sort of thing, so that they die off. And that's about it. Until next time.